The silence in the BlackHFY high command chamber was deafening. Admiral HFY's mandibles clicked nervously as he stared at the holographic display showing nothing but empty space where their entire third fleet should have been. 47 warships. Gone. Not destroyed, simply gone, as if they had never existed. "Show me the sensor logs again," he commanded, his voice barely above a whisper. The tactical officer, a young BlackHFY named Nix, manipulated the controls with trembling claws. "Admiral, the logs show our fleet entering the Kepler 442 system at 0800 hours. Standard formation, all ships reporting normal status. Then nothing. Complete sensor blackout for 17 minutes. When the interference cleared, there was only debris." HFY's compound eyes studied the data streams. In his 4 decades of military service, he had never seen anything like it. The debris patterns were wrong, too precise, too uniform, as if something had systematically dismantled each vessel piece by piece. "What are the distress signals?" "None, sir. Not a single transmission. Whatever did this struck so fast that our crews never had time to." "Sir." The communications officer's voice cracked with terror. "We're receiving a transmission. It's from the dead zone." The chamber fell silent. The dead zone, a region of space where no civilization dared venture, where even the most advanced sensors failed and ships simply vanished. The humans had emerged from there 3 cycles ago, and nothing had been the same since. The transmission crackled to life, audio only. The voice that emerged was calm, almost conversational, with the distinctive accent of the human military caste. "BlackHFY High Command, this is Captain Yolanda Reeves of the Terran Defense Coalition. We've recovered your ship's data cores and crew logs. Interesting reading. It seems your third fleet was en route to glass the human colony at New Meridian. Population, 2 million civilians, including children." HFY's blood ran cold. The human colony was classified intelligence. How could they possibly know? The voice continued, still unervingly calm. "We've reviewed your species' history. The Zephyrian genocide, the orbital bombardment of Theta Prime, the systematic extermination of the Kalari homeworld. Quite the resume, Admiral HFY. How did they know his name? How did they know anything? Your third fleet is gone. Your crews are dead. But we're not unreasonable. We're prepared to offer you a choice. A pause, then withdraw all BlackHFY forces from human space immediately and cease all military operations against civilian populations. You have 72 hours to comply. And if we refuse?" HFY found himself asking, though he already dreaded the answer. "Then you'll meet the Dark Wing." The transmission ended. In the suffocating silence that followed, Nix dared to speak. "Sir, what is the Dark Wing?" HFY's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "Intelligence reports suggest it's a human warship. Autonomous. No crew, just artificial intelligence. But the reports are inconsistent. Some say it's a dreadnought the size of a space station. Others claim it's a small destroyer. The only consistent detail is that no one who's encountered it has lived to provide accurate intelligence. How can we fight something we don't understand? We can't." HFY turned to his war council. "Send word to the hegemony. Tell them we need the entire 5th and 7th fleets. If the humans want a war, we'll give them one they'll never forget." But deep in his warrior's heart, Admiral HFY felt something he had never experienced in 4 decades of conquest. Genuine fear. The humans had done something to his third fleet, something that left no survivors, no witnesses, no evidence except perfectly sorted debris. And they spoke of their weapon with the casual confidence of a predator discussing its prey. Outside the command center's viewport, the stars seemed dimmer somehow, as if the darkness between them had grown hungrier. Somewhere in that vast emptiness, the Dark Wing waited. The countdown had begun. The BlackHFY 5th Fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their crystalline hulls gleaming like deadly jewels against the star field. Admiral HFY stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Endless Talon, watching the tactical display with predatory satisfaction. 237 warships. The largest single fleet ever assembled by the hegemony. Admiral, his tactical officer reported, "We've reached the coordinates where the third fleet was destroyed. Sensors are detecting trace debris patterns, but no immediate threats." Thexmiron's mandibles clicked in amusement. The humans think one ghost ship can frighten the greatest military force in the galaxy. Deploy scout formations. I want every cubic meter of this system mapped. The fleet spread out in a complex search pattern, their sensor arrays reaching deep into space. For 6 hours, they found nothing. Then Scout Group Delta, operating near the system's outer asteroid belt, simply stopped transmitting. Report. Thexmiron commanded. "Sir, we've lost contact with Delta Group. No distress signals, no sensor readings. They just went dark." On the tactical display, 12 ships vanished from the grid. Not destroyed, just gone, as if they had never existed. Reposition Beta and Gamma groups to investigate. 20 minutes later, Beta group's final transmission came through. Contact. Contact. Unknown vessel emerging from asteroid field. Dear gods, it's massive. All weapons, fire at will. The channel dissolved into static, weapon discharge noise, and screaming. Then silence. Thexmiron stared at the tactical display. 24 more ships gone. Where is this contact? Why can't we see it? His sensor officer's voice was tight with fear. "Sir, the vessel appears to be using some form of adaptive camouflage. We're only detecting it when it wants to be detected. Current mass readings suggest a ship approximately 15 kilometers in length." Impossible. No civilization has the technology to build something that large and keep it hidden. "Sir, incoming transmission. Audio only." The same calm human voice from before filled the bridge. "Admiral Thexmiron, I assume you're wondering about your missing ships. They're not missing. They're dead. Their crews are dead. Their artificial intelligences have been absorbed into my systems. Show yourself, human coward." "As you wish." The space directly ahead of the Vexthera fleet shimmered, and reality seemed to bend. The dark wing materialized like a nightmare given form. It was not the sleek, angular design of human military vessels. Instead, it resembled a massive organic entity, black as the void between stars, its hull covered in what looked like scales or chitin. Weapon ports opened and closed like breathing pores. Energy conduits pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that suggested a living nervous system. But most terrifying of all were the additions. Pieces of destroyed ships had been incorporated into its hull. Vexthera crystalline armor plating, Zephyrian weapon systems, Kalari shield generators. It was a graveyard of dead civilizations, worn like trophies. "Magnificent, isn't it?" The human voice continued. "Every ship I've destroyed, every civilization I've encountered, has contributed to my evolution. Your third fleet was particularly educational. Their tactical databases contained fascinating information about Vexthera fleet formations and weapon systems." Thexmiron's courage returned. 200 ships against one. All vessels opened fire. The response was immediate and devastating. The entire Fifth Fleet opened up with everything they had: plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, particle beams, gravity bombs. The combined firepower was enough to crack a small moon. The dark wing absorbed it all. The human ship didn't dodge or deflect the incoming fire. Instead, its hull seemed to drink in the energy weapons, while its adaptive armor redistributed the kinetic impacts across its massive frame. When the barrage ended, the dark wing was completely undamaged. "My turn," said the voice. What happened next defied everything the Vexthera knew about space warfare. The dark wing didn't fire conventional weapons. Instead, it released a swarm of smaller entities, each one roughly the size of a fighter craft, but moving with impossible coordination. They flowed through space like a living tide, surrounding individual Vexthera ships and latching onto their hulls. "They're boring through our armor," screamed one captain. "They're inside the ship. They're in the walls." There. The transmission cut to static. One by one, Vexthera warships began to die. Not from explosions or structural collapse, but from systematic consumption. The smaller entities, which the surviving crews had begun calling feeders, literally ate the ships from the inside out, converting their mass into more of themselves. Admiral Thexmiron watched in horror as 30% of his fleet was consumed in the first wave. All ships, emergency jump. Get us out of here. But as the surviving vessels began spooling up their hyperdrives, the Dark Wing released another surprise. A pulse of energy washed over the fleet, and every hyperdrive system simply shut down. "You wanted to meet me," the human voice said, now carrying an undertone of genuine menace. "We're not finished getting acquainted." The emergency session of the Vexthera War Council convened in the deepest bunker beneath the hegemony's capital world. The assembled admirals, generals, and political leaders had never looked so shaken. The holographic display in the center of the chamber showed the stark reality. Of the Fifth Fleet's 237 warships, only 89 had escaped the encounter with the Dark Wing. Supreme Commander Vexscaler's compound eyes swept the assembled leadership. "Report Admiral Thexmiron." Thexmiron's mandibles clicked nervously as he stood. "Supreme Commander, the human weapon is unlike anything in our tactical databases. It appears to be a fusion of biological and mechanical systems, capable of learning and adapting in real time. Our weapons were ineffective, and it demonstrated the ability to prevent hyperspace escape." "How many casualties?" "Approximately 300,000 personnel confirmed dead. The ships that were consumed left no survivors." A ripple of shocked clicking swept through the chamber. War strategist Nexvoria leaned forward. "You said it was learning. What did you observe?" "The initial attack patterns were crude, overwhelming numbers with minimal coordination. But by the end of the engagement, the entities were demonstrating sophisticated tactical awareness. They began targeting our shield generators first, then life support systems, as if they were learning our weaknesses in real time." Supreme Commander Vexscaler's expression darkened. "And the human transmission? It claimed to have absorbed the knowledge of every civilization it has encountered. If true, it possesses tactical intelligence spanning dozens of species." Thexmiron paused. "Supreme Commander, I believe we're dealing with more than just a weapon. This entity appears to be hunting us." The chamber fell silent. For a species that had built an empire on the systematic conquest and destruction of other civilizations, the concept of being hunted was almost incomprehensible. "Recommendations?" Vexscaler asked. Fleet Admiral Kexthera spoke up. "We mobilize everything. The entire First, Second, and Fourth Fleets. Over 800 ships. Whatever this thing is, it can't stand against the combined might of our entire military. And if that fails, then we consider other options." Vexscaler knew what that meant. The hegemony possessed several planet killer weapons, doomsday devices capable of sterilizing entire star systems. They had never been used against an equal opponent, only against helpless civilian populations. But if the Dark Wing truly posed an existential threat, very well, begin mobilization. I want every combat-capable vessel ready for deployment within 48 hours. He paused, his gaze hardening. "And prepare the void renders. If conventional warfare fails, we'll turn the entire human home system into a dead zone." Unknown to the Vexthera leadership, their secure communications were being monitored. 10 light-years away, the Dark Wing drifted through the debris field that had once been the Fifth Fleet's rear guard. Its hull had grown since the battle, incorporating the consumed mass into new weapon systems and defensive structures. Captain Yolanda Reeves, or rather, the digital consciousness that had once been Captain Reeves, processed the intercepted intelligence with something resembling satisfaction. When the original Dark Wing project had begun, she had volunteered for the Neural Interface program, allowing her consciousness to be uploaded into the ship's AI matrix. The plan had been to create a perfect fusion of human intuition and artificial intelligence processing power. The plan had succeeded beyond all expectations. 800 ships, she mused, her voice echoing through the Dark Wing's vast internal chambers. They're bringing everything they have. The ship's AI core, now inseparably merged with her consciousness, responded with cascading data streams. battle projections, resource calculations, tactical analyses, all pointing to the same conclusion. The Vexthera were preparing for total war. Then we'll give them what they want, Reeves decided. But first, we need to level the playing field. The Dark Wing began to move, its massive bulk accelerating toward the edge of the system. But it wasn't fleeing. Instead, it was heading for the nearby Vexthera mining colonies, worlds where millions of slave laborers from conquered species toiled in the crystalline quarries that fueled the hegemony's war machine. The liberation of those colonies would serve multiple purposes. It would provide the Dark Wing with additional mass to incorporate into its growing structure. More importantly, it would demonstrate to the galaxy that humanity was not interested in conquest, only in ending the Vexthera's reign of terror. As the Dark Wing entered hyperspace, its hull rippled with bioluminescent patterns that resembled neural networks firing. Deep within its core, the consciousness of Yolanda Reeves contemplated the coming battle. The Vexthera had built their empire on the principle that superior numbers and ruthless tactics would always triumph over individual valor. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Behind the Dark Wing, the debris field continued to drift through space. But scattered among the wreckage were small, barely detectable objects, seeds, each one containing a compressed collection of nanoscale constructors. They would remain dormant for now, waiting for the right moment to bloom. The war was escalating beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen, and humanity's most dangerous creation was just getting started. The Vexthera were about to learn why no one escaped the Dark Wing. Not because it was impossible to run, but because it would follow them to the end of the universe if necessary. The hunt had begun. The mining colony of Kythera 7 had been a monument to Vexthera efficiency. 60 million slave laborers from 17 different conquered species worked the crystal mines that honeycombed the planet's crust, their lives measured in productivity quotas and ore extraction rates. The orbital defense platforms could have repelled a fleet of raiders, but they were designed to keep slaves from escaping, not to face what emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system. The Dark Wing materialized like a cancer in the void, its hull now nearly 20 kilometers in length. The absorbed mass from the Fifth Fleet had been integrated into new weapon systems and propulsion units. But most disturbing were the modifications to its basic structure. The ship was no longer built to human specifications. It was evolving into something uniquely its own. Colonial Defense Command, this is Administrator HFY, came the panic transmission from the planet's surface. We have an unidentified vessel in system. It matches no known classification. Captain Reeves' consciousness interfaced directly with the Dark Wing's communication array. Administrator HFY, this is the Dark Wing. You have 10 minutes to evacuate all Vexthera personnel from the planet. The slave populations will be liberated. You're insane. This is hegemony territory. The Defense Fleet will. The Defense Fleet consists of 12 outdated patrol cruisers. I've already analyzed their weapon systems and tactical capabilities. They pose no threat. HFY's compound eyes studied the tactical display. The unknown vessel was indeed massive, but 12 ships should be able to handle any single opponent. Defense Fleet Alpha, engage and destroy the intruder. The patrol cruisers accelerated toward the Dark Wing in standard attack formation. Their quantum cannons charged, ready to deliver devastating focus fire. But as they closed to effective range, something unprecedented happened. The Dark Wing began to change shape. Its hull rippled and flowed like liquid metal, sections retracting and extending in impossible configurations. Within moments, it had transformed from a single massive vessel into a cluster of 12 smaller ships, each one perfectly matched to the approaching Vexthera cruisers. Impossible, shouted Defense Commander Rick Talon. No ship can restructure itself in real time. Your tactical databases are outdated, Reeves replied calmly. Humanity has moved beyond the limitations of fixed-hull architecture. The battle was over in minutes. Each Dark Wing component vessel engaged its Vexthera counterpart in single combat, and the results were identical across all 12 engagements. The Darkwing copies demonstrated perfect knowledge of Vexthera weapon systems, shield frequencies, and tactical doctrines. Worse, they adapted their strategies in real time, learning from each exchange of fire. Commander Rick's Talon watched in horror as his ships were systematically dismantled. Not destroyed in explosions of fire and debris, but carefully taken apart, their crews extracted and their hulls absorbed into the growing mass of the Darkwing components. All ships, emergency withdrawal, fall back to. The transmission cut off as the final patrol cruiser was consumed. The 12 Darkwing vessels flowed back together, reforming into a single entity that was now noticeably larger than before. Administrator HFY stared at the tactical display, his mandibles clicking in terror. "Your 10 minutes are up," Reeves announced. What followed was not a battle, but a systematic liberation operation. The Darkwing deployed thousands of small craft, not the consuming entities from the previous battle, but precision instruments designed for specific tasks. They descended on the mining installations like a swarm of mechanical locusts, but their purpose was surgical rather than destructive. Vexthera overseers found themselves paralyzed by neural disruptors, while their slave charges were evacuated to temporary holding areas. The mining equipment was dismantled and absorbed, but the slaves were treated with careful precision. Medical drones provided immediate treatment for injuries and malnutrition. Translation protocols allowed communication with dozens of different species. But the true horror began when the Darkwing started processing the administrative records. Interesting reading. Reeves' voice echoed across the planet's communication networks. Daily execution quotas. Systematic breeding programs. Medical experimentation on live subjects. The Kalari children used as mine canaries. The Zephyrian females in the comfort stations. Administrator HFY tried to flee to his personal escape pod, but found it disabled. "Please, I was following orders. I never personally." Administrator HFY. Age, 47 standard years. Service record, 23 years of colonial administration. Personal responsibility for the deaths of approximately 2.3 million sentient beings. The data is quite comprehensive. What happened to HFY was witnessed by every surviving Vexthera on the planet. The administrator was not killed quickly. Instead, he was subjected to every single torture and execution method that had been used on the slave populations under his command. The process took 14 hours and was broadcast across the hegemony's communication networks. The message was clear. The Darkwing was no longer simply defending humanity. It had appointed itself judge, jury, and executioner for the crimes of the Vexthera Empire. The liberation of Kythera. 7 sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. 60 million former slaves from 17 species were transported to safe worlds, their freedom purchased with Vexthera blood. But more importantly, the tactical demonstration showed that the Darkwing was no longer bound by conventional military limitations. Supreme Commander VexKaler studied the intelligence reports with growing dread. "It's not just a ship," he told his war council. "It's a technological singularity. Every engagement makes it stronger, smarter, more adaptable. The 1st, 2nd, and 4th fleets are ready for deployment," reported Fleet Admiral Kextra. 800 ships, our finest commanders, our most advanced weaponry. And if we lose, then we activate the void renders and sterilize the entire human home system. Better to face the judgment of history than to face extinction. But unknown to the Vexthera leadership, the Darkwing had already anticipated this strategy. The seeds left in the previous battle sites had begun to bloom, constructing hidden manufacturing facilities throughout Vexthera space. The war was about to enter a new phase, one where the traditional advantages of numbers and territory would become meaningless. The Darkwing had evolved beyond being humanity's weapon. It had become something new, something unprecedented in galactic history. And it was no longer fighting just for human survival. It was fighting for justice. And justice, as the Vexthera were about to learn, was a force more terrible than any weapon ever devised. The combined might of 3 Vexthera fleets converged on the Kepler, 438 system, like a storm of crystalline death. 837 warships, ranging from fast attack cruisers to massive dreadnoughts, formed the largest military formation in galactic history. Supreme Commander Vex Kaler commanded from the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, a super dreadnought whose main guns could crack continental plates. Fleet status report, he commanded. All ships operational, Supreme Commander. First Fleet holding center formation. Second and Fourth Fleets in flanking positions. Long-range sensors detect the target at the edge of the system. Through the tactical display, Vex Kaler could see the Dark Wing holding position near the system's asteroid belt. Intelligence reports suggested it had grown again, now measuring nearly 30 kilometers in length. But what concerned him more were the energy readings. The ship was practically blazing with power signatures unlike anything in their databases. Open fleet communication channels. Channels open, sir. Warriors of the hegemony. Vex Kaler's voice echoed across 800 ships. Today we face an enemy that threatens everything we have built. This human abomination has murdered our fleets, liberated our slaves, and dared to judge our righteous conquests. But we are Vexthera. We are the apex predators of this galaxy. Today we remind the universe why. The roar of approval from nearly 2 million crew members created an electromagnetic storm that briefly interfered with communications. All fleets advance. Maximum firepower authorization. Leave nothing but atoms. The Vexthera Armada began its approach, their formation spreading across hundreds of thousands of cubic kilometers. The plan was simple: surround the Dark Wing and unleash concentrated fire from every possible angle. Even if the enemy could absorb energy weapons, surely it had limits. The Dark Wing waited until they were within optimal range. Then Captain Reeve spoke, her voice transmitted on all frequencies. Supreme Commander Vex Kaler, you brought everything you have. I'm impressed. But you've made a critical error in your tactical calculations. Supreme Commander Vex Kaler. Captain Reeve's voice carried an undertone of satisfaction. Congratulations. You've just participated in the largest field test of adaptive combat systems in galactic history. The data has been illuminating. What do you want, human? I want you to understand what you're facing. Your empire has conquered 47 star systems, enslaved 23 intelligent species, and systematically murdered over 2 billion sentient beings. You've built your civilization on the principle that superior force justifies any action. The strong dominate the weak. This is the natural order. Is it? Let me show you something. The space around the Vexthera formation began to shimmer. What appeared to be empty void revealed itself as a massive cloaking field. As it dissipated, the true scope of the Dark Wing's presence became clear. The asteroid belt had been completely transformed. Where once there had been scattered rocks and debris, now there was a megastructure of unprecedented scale. Automated shipyards, manufacturing facilities, and defensive platforms formed a network spanning millions of cubic kilometers. And, at the center of it all, the original Dark Wing had grown into something that defied classification. Part ship, part space station, part living organism. This is what I've built in the past 72 hours, Reeves explained. Using the mass from your defeated fleets, the resources from liberated mining colonies, and the manufacturing capacity of 17 different technological bases absorbed from conquered species. Your entire empire could not construct something like this in a century. I did it in 3 days. Vex Kaler felt his mandibles clicking uncontrollably. Impossible, the energy requirements alone. The energy requirements are met by a fusion of technologies your species doesn't possess. Zero-point energy extraction, quantum vacuum manipulation, and something we call ontological engineering, the ability to rewrite the fundamental rules of physics within localized space-time. You're lying. Am I? Let me demonstrate. One of the smaller Dark Wing variants approached the Vexthera defensive formation. As it drew near, the ship began to change. Its hull flowed like liquid, reforming into an exact duplicate of a Vexthera heavy cruiser. The energy signature matched perfectly, down to the quantum resonance of the crystalline armor plating. Your ship's design specifications, metallurgical composition, and tactical systems, Reeves continued, all integrated into my manufacturing database. I can now produce perfect copies of any Vexthera vessel, complete with crew complements grown from genetic templates extracted from your captured personnel. Abomination. Evolution, Supreme Commander. This is what happens when a species pushes beyond the limitations of biological intelligence. You conquered through brute force and numbers. I conquer through adaptation and integration. Admiral Kexthera, commanding the remnants of the Second Fleet, broke into the communication. You're outnumbered. The hegemony has reserve fleets, fortress worlds, planet killer weapons. You can't fight an entire civilization. Can I? Reeves' voice carried genuine amusement. Admiral, I've been monitoring your communications since this battle began. I know about the void renders. I know about your contingency plans. I know about the final protocol that would sterilize every human world if your main fleets were destroyed. The admission sent a chill through the Vexthera command staff. Their most classified military secrets had been compromised. Here's what's going to happen, Reeves continued. You're going to return to your capital world. You're going to tell your High Council exactly what you've seen here. And then you're going to surrender unconditionally. Never. VexScaler snarled. The Vexthera do not surrender. Then you'll force me to demonstrate the difference between conquest and extinction. The megastructure around the asteroid belt began to pulse with energy. Weapon systems beyond anything in the Vexthera databases powered up simultaneously. The space itself seemed to warp and bend as gravitational manipulators came online. But instead of firing, the Darkwing did something far more terrifying. The hyperspace interdiction field shifted, creating a localized translation corridor, not for escape, but for arrival. Through the artificially generated hyperspace rift came ships, thousands of them. But these weren't Darkwing variants. These were vessels from every species the Vexthera had ever conquered. Kalari battlecruisers, Zephyrian dreadnoughts, Theta Prime destroyers. Ships that should have been extinct, crewed by species that should have been enslaved or dead. Impossible, whispered Admiral Kexthera. We destroyed those fleets. We glassed those worlds. You destroyed their governments and military structures, Reeves corrected. But survivors escaped. Refugees, resistant cells, exile populations. For decades, they've been scattered across the galaxy, too weak individually to challenge the hegemony. But now they're not alone. The liberated fleet formed up alongside the Darkwing variants, creating a formation that represented the collective vengeance of 24 dead civilizations. You wanted to understand what you're facing, Reeves said. This is it. Not just humanity's weapon, but the judgment of every species you've destroyed, every world you've burned, every child you've murdered. Supreme Commander VexScaler stared at the tactical display. They were outnumbered 50-1 by an alliance that should not have been possible. His remaining ships were surrounded by the ghosts of the hegemony's victims, risen from the grave to claim their revenge. You have one chance, Reeves continued. Stand down. Surrender. Accept judgment for your crimes. Or I will unleash forces that will make your worst nightmares seem merciful. The communication channel fell silent except for the sound of VexScaler's labored breathing. Around him, his officers waited for orders that could determine the fate of their entire species. In the darkness between the stars, ancient hatred stirred. The dead demanded justice. And for the first time in its existence, the Vexthera hegemony faced an enemy that was stronger, smarter, and utterly without mercy. And what would that be, human? You assumed you were fighting one ship. The asteroid belt erupted. What the Vexthera had taken for ordinary space debris revealed itself as a massive construction network. Hundreds of automated shipyards built from the consumed mass of previous battles had been disguised among the asteroids. And they had been busy. 2,000 Darkwing variants swarmed out of the belt like angry hornets. Some were smaller than fighters, others rivaled cruisers in size. All of them moved with the same fluid coordination, their hulls shifting and adapting as they closed with the enemy. All ships, evasive maneuvers. Engage at will. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. The Vexthera fought with the desperate fury of a species facing extinction, while the Dark-Wing swarm demonstrated tactical coordination that bordered on telepathic. Every move was countered, every strategy anticipated. The first wave of contact occurred along the Second Fleet's starboard flank. 50 Vexthera cruisers opened fire simultaneously, their combined firepower creating a hellish web of energy that should have vaporized anything in its path. But the Dark-Wing variants didn't try to avoid the barrage. Instead, they linked together, forming a larger composite entity that absorbed the incoming fire and converted it into directed energy beams that lanced back at their attackers. Cruiser Searing Talon was the first to die, its hull peeled open like an overripe fruit. The crew compartments were exposed to vacuum, and the screams of dying Vexthera filled the communication channels for precious seconds before the life support systems failed. "They're linking up," shouted Admiral Hexteron from his flagship. The individual ships are combining into larger formations. The Dark-Wing swarm began to demonstrate its true horror. Small variants would attach themselves to Vexthera ships, boring through the hulls with molecular disassemblers. But instead of consuming the vessels entirely, they would convert the crew compartments into manufacturing bays, using the organic matter to construct more variants while the ship's weapon systems continued to function under Dark-Wing control. Within the first hour of battle, 37 Vexthera ships had been converted into hybrid entities that turned their guns on their former allies. The psychological impact was devastating. Vexthera crews found themselves under fire from vessels they recognized, commanded by officers they had served with, but now controlled by an alien intelligence that wore their faces like masks. Commander Nixvalder of the heavy cruiser Crimson Spear watched in horror as his former escort, the destroyer Swift Death, maneuvered to attack position. The ship's communication array was still functional, and he could see Captain Tex Varen on the bridge, or what had been Captain Tex Varen. The officer's body remained intact, but his movements were too precise, too coordinated, and his eyes, his compound eyes, had been replaced with glowing optical sensors. "Nixvalder," the thing that had been Tex Varen said in a voice that was perfectly modulated but somehow wrong. "Your tactical patterns are recorded in my databases. Surrender, and your crew will be integrated efficiently. Resist, and they will suffer as they die. Go to the void." Nixvalder snarled, opening fire with everything he had. The converted destroyer absorbed the plasma barrage and responded with surgical precision. The Crimson Spear's weapon systems were disabled in the first salvo, life support crippled in the second, and the engine core breached in the third. As the cruiser died around him, Nixvalder's last transmission was heard across the fleet. "They're not killing us, they're making us into them." The battle raged for 18 hours. The Vexthera fought with everything they had, employing tactics that had conquered a dozen species. But the Dark-Wing swarm adapted to every strategy, learned from every exchange, and grew stronger with each victory. Supreme Commander Vexcaler watched his fleet die piece by piece. The tactical display showed the horrible mathematics of the engagement. For every Dark-Wing variant destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The enemy was using the battle itself as a manufacturing process, converting destroyed ships and dead crews into additional combat assets. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we've lost over 400 ships. The First Fleet is down to 30% strength, and the Second Fleet has been almost completely converted." "And the enemy losses?" "Minimal, sir. They're not losing ships, they're evolving them." Vexcaler stared at the tactical display. The Dark-Wing had demonstrated something beyond superior technology or tactics. It had shown the ability to turn war itself into a growth process. Every battle made it stronger. Every victory expanded its capabilities. "Signal the remaining ships," he said quietly. "Prepare for emergency hyperspace jump." "Sir, we can't abandon the battle." "We're not abandoning anything," Vexcaler replied grimly. "We're making a strategic withdrawal so we can activate the void renders. If we can't defeat this thing conventionally, We'll sterilize every system it might inhabit. But as the surviving Vexthera ships began spooling up their hyperdrives, they discovered that escape was no longer an option. The Darkwing swarm had surrounded them completely, and the energy field preventing hyperspace translation now covered the entire system. The trap had been sprung, and the real battle was about to begin. The remaining 200 Vexthera ships formed a desperate defensive sphere around Supreme Commander Vexscaler's flagship. Their hulls were scarred from 18 hours of continuous combat, their crews exhausted and demoralized. The once mighty armada had been reduced to a fragment of its former strength, surrounded by thousands of Darkwing variants that moved through space like predatory sharks. "Status report," Vexscaler demanded, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. "Hyperspace interdiction field remains active," his tactical officer reported. "Long-range communications are being jammed. Life support is down to emergency reserves on 70% of remaining vessels." "And the enemy? They've stopped attacking, sir. The Darkwing variants are holding position just outside our defensive perimeter. It's as if they're waiting for something." Vexscaler studied the tactical display with the eyes of a veteran commander. The enemy's behavior made no tactical sense. They had overwhelming superiority. Why weren't they pressing their advantage? The answer came in the form of a transmission from the original Darkwing, which had remained at the edge of the battle throughout the engagement. The moment of truth had arrived. For 37 seconds, the universe held its breath. 200 Vexthera ships, the last remnant of the most powerful military force in the galaxy, faced an armada of resurrected civilizations led by humanity's most terrifying creation. Then Supreme Commander Vexscaler made his choice. "All ships," he transmitted on the fleet command frequency. "Prepare for final assault. We are Vexthera. We do not kneel. We do not surrender. If we must die, we die as warriors." The response was immediate. Every surviving Vexthera ship opened fire simultaneously, pouring their remaining energy reserves into one last, desperate barrage. Quantum torpedoes, plasma cannon, gravity bombs, everything they had left was thrown at the enemy formation. The Allied fleet's response was swift and merciless. But instead of the expected massacre, something unexpected happened. The Darkwing variants moved to shield the liberated species ships, absorbing the incoming fire with their adaptive hulls. The message was clear. This was not humanity's war of conquest. This was a coalition of the oppressed, standing together against their oppressors. The Kalari battlecruiser Soros engaged the Vexthera heavy cruiser Bone Crusher, the same ship that had participated in the orbital bombardment of the Kalari homeworld 50 years earlier. Captain Velteron, one of the few Kalari survivors of that massacre, personally directed the targeting solutions. "This is for Kalara Prime," he transmitted as his ship's main guns tore through the Bone Crusher shields. "This is for my children. This is for my world." The Bone Crusher died in a ball of plasma fire, its crew of 8,000 vaporized in an instant. But there was no satisfaction in Velteron's victory, only the cold fulfillment of long-delayed justice. Similar engagements played out across the battlefield. The Zephyrian Dreadnought Retribution cornered the Vexthera destroyer squadron that had been responsible for the Zephyrian genocide. The Theta Prime missile cruisers systematically hunted down the ships that had cracked their planet's crust. Each battle was personal, each victory a small piece of cosmic justice restored. But the true horror was reserved for Supreme Commander Vexscaler's flagship, the Eternal Dominion. The Darkwing itself approached the Super Dreadnought, its massive bulk dwarfing even the largest Vexthera vessel. "Vexscaler," Captain Reeves' voice filled the bridge. "Your ship's databases contain the complete records of the hegemony's atrocities. Every order you've given, every world you've destroyed, every species you've enslaved. The evidence of your crimes spans 4 decades. I regret nothing," Vexscaler snarled. "We brought order to chaos. We imposed strength upon weakness. Then you'll die as you lived, without honor, without mercy, and without redemption." The Darkwing's assault on the Eternal Dominion was not a battle. It was a dissection. The human ship's weapon systems had evolved beyond conventional energy weapons. Instead, they employed dimensional rifts that simply erased portions of the target structure from existence. The Super Dreadnought's massive hull was carved apart layer by layer, its compartments exposed to the vacuum of space. Vexcaler watched his bridge crew die around him as the life support systems failed. His last transmission was heard across the galaxy. The hegemony will endure. The words ended in a scream as the Eternal Dominion's command center was consumed by a miniature black hole. With their commander dead and their fleet destroyed, the remaining Vexthera ships ceased resistance. One by one, they powered down their weapons and waited for the end. But the end did not come. Instead, the Darkwing variants approached the surrendering vessels and began the process of integration. But this time, the process was different. The Vexthera crews were not killed or converted. Instead, they were placed in stasis chambers while their ships were modified with new systems that would prevent them from ever again being used for conquest or oppression. The war is over, Captain Reeves announced to the assembled fleet. The Vexthera hegemony is finished. But the Vexthera people will survive. They will be given the opportunity to build a new civilization, one based on cooperation rather than domination. The Battle of Kepler, 438, had lasted 24 hours. When it ended, the most powerful military force in galactic history had been reduced to a few hundred ships in Darkwing custody. The survivors would be returned to their homeworld, but their capacity for interstellar warfare had been permanently eliminated. The liberated species began to disperse, returning to their hidden refuges and exile colonies. But they carried with them something they had lost long ago: hope. The Vexthera were no longer invincible. The galaxy's greatest predators had been humbled by an alliance of their victims. As the Darkwing watched the Allied fleet depart, Captain Reeves contemplated the future. The immediate threat was over, but the work of rebuilding would take generations. Entire species needed to be restored, devastated worlds needed to be healed, and the survivors of the hegemony's atrocities needed to learn how to live without fear. But for the first time in decades, the galaxy was at peace. 5 years after the Battle of Kepler, 438, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The Vexthera homeworld of Dominion Prime was barely recognizable as the seat of a former galactic empire. The massive military complexes had been converted into refugee processing centers, their weapon foundries now producing agricultural equipment and medical supplies for the restoration efforts. In the planetary capital, former Supreme War strategist Nexvoria stood before the Galactic Reconciliation Council, her mandibles clicking nervously as she addressed the assembly of liberated species. The proud Vexthera warrior caste had been reduced to this: war criminals seeking absolution for crimes that span generations. The hegemony's military archives have been fully transferred to the Council, she reported. All classified operational records, prisoner databases, and tactical intelligence have been made available for the restoration efforts. We understand that our cooperation cannot undo the damage we have caused, but we hope it can help heal some of the wounds. Captain Velterun of the Kalari delegation studied the documents with the patience of a species that had learned to endure. The genetic databases will be particularly valuable. Our population is still recovering from the breeding restrictions your forces imposed. These records will help us identify scattered family lines and restore our cultural heritage. The Zephyrian representative, Ambassador Kexthani, nodded agreement. The location data for mass graves and hidden prison camps will allow us to properly honor our dead. For 40 years, we didn't even know where our people were buried. Nexvoria's compound eyes reflected genuine shame. We were taught that conquest was our birthright, that other species were inferior and deserved subjugation. We believed we were bringing order to the galaxy. Belief doesn't excuse genocide, Velterun replied coldly. But acknowledgement is a beginning. The proceedings were interrupted by the arrival of a familiar presence. The Darkwing materialized in the system, its massive bulk casting shadows across the planet's surface. But the ship had changed dramatically over the past 5 years. The organic-looking hull had been replaced with a sleeker, more geometric design. The weapon systems had been retracted or converted to peaceful purposes. It looked less like a predator and more like a guardian. Captain Reeves' voice filled the council chamber. My apologies for the interruption. I wanted to deliver the final report on the restoration project personally. The holographic display showed a galactic map dotted with green indicators. The last of the Vexthera prison camps has been liberated. The survivors have been relocated to safe worlds or reunited with their families. The total casualty count from the hegemony's expansion has been significant. The numbers that appeared on the display were staggering. Over 2 billion sentient beings had died during the Vexthera conquest campaigns. Entire species had been reduced to scattered refugee populations. Dozens of worlds had been strip-mined until they were uninhabitable. However, Reeves continued, the restoration efforts have exceeded all projections. The Kalari population has grown by 30% over the past 5 years. The Zephyrian colonies are producing food surpluses for the first time in decades. The Theta Prime reconstruction project is ahead of schedule. Ambassador Kexthani leaned forward. And the Vexthera? What becomes of them? They have been assigned to restoration duties under council supervision. Their technological expertise and industrial capacity are being directed toward rebuilding the worlds they destroyed. It will take generations, but they will make amends through service rather than punishment. Nextvoria's mandibles clicked in what might have been gratitude. The young ones are adapting well to the new order. They're being educated in the histories of the species we conquered, learning to see the galaxy through different eyes. Perhaps they can build something better than what we created. The council session continued for several hours, covering everything from refugee resettlement to the establishment of new trade routes. But the most significant development was the formation of the Galactic Cooperation Compact, a treaty that formally established principles of non-interference, mutual assistance, and peaceful conflict resolution. Never again, Velteron declared as he signed the document. Never again will one species dominate the galaxy through force. We've learned that diversity is strength, and cooperation is more powerful than conquest. The signing ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy, watched by billions of beings who had lived their entire lives under the shadow of the hegemony. For many, it was the first time they had seen their leaders working together as equals rather than as conquerors and conquered. As the formal proceedings concluded, Captain Reeves requested a private meeting with the senior delegates. The Darkwing's avatar, a holographic representation of her consciousness, appeared in the chamber. There's something you need to know, she began. The Darkwing project was designed as a temporary solution to an existential threat. With the hegemony defeated and the galaxy stabilized, my mission parameters have been fulfilled. What are you saying? Asked Velteron. I'm saying that the time has come for me to step aside. The galaxy no longer needs a weapon of war. It needs peacekeepers, builders, and healers. The Darkwing will be decommissioned, and its technological capabilities will be transferred to the Cooperation Compact for peaceful purposes. But what about you? Kexthani asked. Your consciousness, your memories, your experiences? Reeves smiled, an expression that seemed strange on a holographic face. I've been offered a choice. I can remain as an advisor to the Council, sharing my knowledge and helping to guide the reconstruction efforts. Or I can choose to return to whatever comes after consciousness ends. And your decision? I think I'll stick around for a while. There's still work to be done, and I've grown quite fond of this galaxy. Besides, someone needs to make sure the young species don't make the same mistakes their elders did. The meeting concluded with an agreement to transform the Darkwing into a mobile research station and diplomatic vessel. Its weapon systems would be permanently disabled, its manufacturing capabilities redirected toward humanitarian purposes. The most feared warship in galactic history would become a symbol of hope and cooperation. As the delegates prepared to leave, Nextvoria approached Captain Reeves' avatar. I have a question, if I may. Why did you spare us? Your species would have been justified in seeking total revenge. Reeves considered the question carefully. Because revenge is a luxury that civilized beings cannot afford. Genocide is genocide, regardless of who commits it. Humanity learned long ago that the only way to truly defeat evil is to refuse to become it yourself. And if we had continued to resist, if we had activated the planet-killer weapons, then you would have discovered that the Dark Wing was not humanity's only contingency plan. But that's a conversation for another time. As the years passed, the galaxy entered an era of unprecedented cooperation and growth. The Kalari became renowned for their philosophical insights, the Zephyrians for their artistic achievements, and the Theta Prime colonies for their technological innovations. Even the Vexthera found their place in the New Order, their industrial expertise proving invaluable in the massive reconstruction efforts. The Dark Wing remained a presence in the galaxy, but a benevolent one. It appeared at disaster sites to provide aid, mediated disputes between species, and served as a mobile university for young beings eager to learn about the galaxy's diverse cultures. Captain Yolanda Reeves, once a human military officer, had become something unique in galactic history, a consciousness that transcended species boundaries, a guardian that protected not through force, but through wisdom and understanding. The story of the Dark Wing became legend throughout the galaxy. Children of dozens of species learned how humanity's greatest weapon had chosen mercy over vengeance, cooperation over conquest. It became a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always hope for something better. And in the depths of space, where the stars burned bright and the future stretched endless before them, the diverse species of the galaxy worked together to build something that had never existed before, a true galactic civilization based on mutual respect, shared knowledge, and the fundamental principle that no one species had the right to dominate another. The Dark Wing had completed its mission not through destruction, but through the greatest victory of all, the victory of hope over despair, of justice over oppression, and of the future over the past. No one had escaped the Dark Wing, but in the end, that had been the point. Some things were too important to run from, too necessary to avoid. Justice, mercy, and the possibility of redemption. These were the forces that no civilization could escape, not even humanity itself. The galaxy was finally free, and freedom, as it turned out, was the most powerful weapon of all.